Hello and welcome to Occupied Thoughts, a podcast brought to you by the Foundation for Middle East Peace. I am Sarah Ann Minkin, Director of Programs and Partnerships at the Foundation. Today is February 3rd, 2025, and I am delighted to be here with Hilary Rantisi, one of FMEP's 2025 non-resident fellows. This is our first official podcast together with you as fellow Hilary, and I am so glad you're here. Thank you.
Thank you. It's really an honor for me.
And for us. Thank you. So I want to introduce you to our audience first with your bio and then with questions.
Great.
Hilary Rantisi grew up in Palestine and has been involved with education and advocacy on the Middle East since her move to the United States. She is currently the Associate Director of the Religion, Conflict, and Peace Initiative and co-instructor of Learning in Context, Narratives of Displacement and Belonging in Israel-Palestine at Harvard Divinity School. She has over 2 decades of experience in institution building at Harvard, having been the director of the Middle East Initiative at Harvard Kennedy School of Government prior to her current role. She has a BA in Political Science and International Studies from Aurora University and a master's degree in Middle Eastern Studies from the University of Chicago. Before Hilary moved to the US, she worked at Birzeit University in the West Bank and at the Jerusalem-based Sabeel Ecumenical Liberation Theology Center. She's been involved with community leadership efforts and served on many boards to build multifaceted support for Palestinian rights and a more nuanced understanding of people's lives in the Middle East region, including the Gaza Mental Health Foundation. Hilary, thank you so much for being here. I want to ask you to tell us a little bit more about yourself in your own words. Tell us about your family, about growing up in Palestine, about what brought you to the US.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah Ann. It's really an honor to be part of FMEP this year. So, yeah, I was born in Jerusalem and I grew up in Ramallah. And usually when people ask where you're from as a Palestinian, it's not necessarily where you grew up. Most Palestinians are descendants or survivors of the Nakba. And for me, if I have time, I will explain that I am both from Jerusalem, because I was born there. I'm from Ramallah because I grew up there. I am from Lid because my father is a Nakba survivor from Lid, and it's where my ancestors are from. But I'm also from Gaza because that's where my grandmother is from. And the reason why I make a point of mentioning all these places is because all these places are separate and treated separately by the Israeli occupation. I have a West Bank ID that restricts my presence and where I can live in the Ramallah area in the West Bank. So I'm not allowed to go to Jerusalem where I was born. I'm not allowed to go to Lid where our family is from, and definitely not allowed to go to Gaza where many of my ancestors are from. So I make a point because even though the occupation is saying that I'm restricted, that I'm only from this one area, I embody all these places. So they are all part of me and I can't separate them from each other. And so I make a point of always mentioning that. And having grown up under military occupation, that's where most of my experience has been. Growing up in Ramallah, my parents, my father, as I mentioned, was a Nakba survivor from Lid. And as a child, when they walked from Lid to Ramallah, and they ended up in tents, living in tents for quite a few years. He lost years of schooling, but then had an opportunity to go back to school and was taken into like a home for boys who were refugees. That later on in life, when he was able to finish his education, him and my mother established a home for boys. And so I grew up in a boys' home in Ramallah. So that's also part of my upbringing, living with many, many people in community. And my parents over 30 years had about 215 boys go through the home. So I have many brothers, and I grew up there with my sister. So we're the two girls with many boys around us. But we all, we lived in Ramallah under military occupation in this home in community. And my father was by training, by profession, he was a pastor. But this was his work in the community, was running the home, and then was very involved in politics. So in 1976, there were municipal elections that the Israelis allowed for the first time ever, and he ran in the party, in the Kutla al-Wataniya, it was called, the National Bloc, and he became deputy mayor of Ramallah. And the mayor of Ramallah was Karim Khalaf, who in 1980 the Israelis had placed a bomb in his car. He lost part of his leg. The mayor of Nablus lost 2 of his legs. The same day, these 2 bombs went off in these 2 very important mayors of 2 very important cities. So all of a sudden, my dad, who was deputy mayor, became mayor, and although he was deposed by the Israelis later on, there was no elections for any mayors for quite a while. And even when the Palestinian Authority came into place, there were no elections initially. And so my father was sort of a respected member of the community. And yeah, so I grew up in the midst of all of these things. So you could say, the boys' home, the church, the politics, being in the midst of everything, unfolding in our home, unfolding around our home. And for me personally, I think maybe the most pivotal time for me, the most important and formative time for me, was the first Intifada. And so whenever I always go back to the first Intifada, I think of the excitement of that time, but also the feeling that we had agency and that we were making history. And I want to remember that moment and that time that propels me, and also reminds me of what it means like to work in community, to do things. And so those are, I think, a few things that I would share about myself. Hopefully it will give you a bit more about who I am and some of the values that I bring.
Thank you. Thank you so much. What brought you to the US?
So I initially came to the US for college, and then for graduate school. And then I went back to Palestine. So I had no intention of living in the US. I was here on a student visa, went back to Palestine, and then I met an American man, got married in Palestine to an American, and we came here initially for a short time, but it's been many, many years since I've been here. So luckily, even since my move to the US, 2001, my work has kept me connected with Palestine and the Middle East region generally, so that I have been able to go back on a regular basis. But yeah, so I moved here, in 2001.
Okay, thank you. So you gave us so much about your upbringing and your time in Palestine, and you brought up the first Intifada and said these are some of the values that you're bringing. I want to ask you to maybe talk a little bit specifically, like, what are the values that you're trying to strengthen or amplify or embody in your work?
Thank you. So, I think about I mentioned my father and what he did in his life and the importance of education. I think for most Palestinians, education is sort of an ingrained value, go and get an education. Um, and so that has always been important for us. And here I am working in education in the US in a very renowned university, very powerful university. And um, my work has been on the Middle East more broadly, and now more recently has been on Palestine. And it has been a journey. So working at Harvard, the first part of my time at Harvard, I was at the Harvard Kennedy School. And so it was a bit more of an introduction to the US in a different way, and an introduction to the policy world, introduction to a place of power, and Harvard being a place of power, me being there, I it was difficult. I struggled with it. And how are you Palestinian in this space? How can you make change? How can you um, share your story, I guess? And I think um, I was able to create space for other people, but I didn't want to completely belong, because belonging meant that I would lose my voice. And so for all these years that I was at the Kennedy School, I was close to seeing how power manifested itself. But then I was lucky enough to start working with a faculty member at the Divinity School where I am now, and I eventually moved there, um, who her work is about the critique of power. And they're both at Harvard, but very different perspectives. And I found that that is where I, I could be more myself, um, in a space where there is a critique of power. And so um, um, in my work now, this focus more on Palestine, Israel, the Religion, Conflict, and Peace Initiative centers an analysis of power, of structural injustice and violence. And so we look at all forms of violence, and hopefully we're giving students tools to unpack things, to see things that they may have not seen, rather than telling them what to think, giving them the tools to question and to center marginalized voices, to always ask, where is your gaze, to always be aware how you're situated, where are you, what's your positionality in this. And I think my work now has helped give me some of this language, but it also has given me an opportunity to to be a bridge, to share with the students my experience, and to open up a whole new world. So although, Religion, Conflict, and Peace Initiative, the case study is on Israel Palestine, I think the tools that we are, or what we're teaching, is applicable to sort of any conflict in the world, but also just living in the US. There's structural injustice all around us. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so that's part of the learning and part of the values that we kind of impart to our students. Um, in our course, learning in context, narratives of displacement and belonging in Israel-Palestine, we take students to Israel-Palestine, and we take them to meet people on the ground, to experience, to feel, to touch what you see, what you hear, what you touch. All of engaging your senses in learning is very different than learning in the classroom. And it has been transformational for students. And so it has been a privilege for me and amazing to be part of this course where we've taken students to meet with people on the ground and see things. They have come back to do amazing work, not just on Israel-Palestine, but on many other issues in their own communities. So it has been amazing to be part of it. I think, I hope I shared some of these values, but I'm looking at what's happening now on campus, and it's very difficult to know how to continue when our space is also becoming much smaller, much more controlled. And I can't not mention, especially now, what is it? Today's the 3rd of February, that it's been, I don't know, about 10 days or so since Harvard adopted the IHRA definition for antisemitism, and how that could be used to silence, to close in our spaces of discussion, spaces where students can learn and question. And so I am concerned about the future, but this has been my work. I'm very happy that I was part of it, and I hope I can continue it in one way or other.
Thank you for all of that, for the description of your trajectory of working so close to power, and then in the Kennedy School, the Harvard Kennedy School, and then realizing that where you wanted to be was in this place of critiquing power and working with students to think about what power looks like and how it acts, and how we can understand particular areas of distinct conflict and inequality, specifically around Israel-Palestine, but taking those skills also and applying them elsewhere. You presented that to us, I think, in such compelling ways. I certainly wish that I could have gone on your course and learned in context with you, but also bringing us now to this this very real circumstance in which the long-running campaign to redefine anti-Semitism to include very specific and wide-ranging examples of critique of Israel as anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
This campaign has been very successful, and Harvard very recently made a decision to adopt the IHRA definition within the university as part of its regulations within the university. We have, FMEP has done a lot of coverage around the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. So I'm just going to say to all of our listeners now, we have endless resources for you, both podcasts and op-eds and data, and look at our lawfare.fmep.org website for all the links you need to understand and think about the IHRA, the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. We have so many resources, and we will continue to cover this obviously escalating problem in a world with increasing and escalating anti-Semitism, where that problem is not helped by this focus on criticism of Israel as anti-Semitism. So just as a thank you, Hilary, for demonstrating for us how real this is. You're on a college campus, you teach about Israel-Palestine, and now your college has adopted the IHRA, your university has adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. So thank you for that. Is there anything else you want to say about that, about the IHRA definition, or about being on
I mean, I
campus
think,
now?
yeah, I think I'm gonna be with you for the year, so I think you may be with me in this journey. So we will see how things will unfold on campus. But I feel like my identity as a Palestinian is just my being Palestinian is unacceptable according to the definition. So I've raised this question on campus to administration, asking them how they're going to protect me. So we will see.
We'll see. May I ask you to just unpack for our listeners why the IHRA definition makes you feel like your identity as a Palestinian is unacceptable?
Well, I mean, it's how people could use it to interpret what anti-Semitism is, as any criticism of Israel, and if you're just sharing like my story as a Palestinian who whose family are survivors of the Nakba, you're going to talk about the atrocities of the Nakba. There is a criticism of Israel in its founding, and for some, they might want to interpret that as anti-Semitic. I mean, I'm just giving one example from my life, but I think it's because of its broad definition is so dangerous, and how people can use it not only to silence people, but also to attack people, to marginalize them, and yeah, I think I need to become more articulate about specifically this point, but I do feel very vulnerable. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think that I appreciate you sharing your vulnerability, and we certainly know and have countless examples of the direct targeting of Palestinians using the IHRA definition. And I just want to sort of add, for any listeners who are unfamiliar with the definition, and I hope if maybe you're just tuning in now, and so you're unfamiliar with the definition, look it up, read the whole thing, go to our resources on it. But I just want to say that there is a definition of anti-Semitism, which is pretty, I don't know, direct, almost anodyne, that it's about hatred towards Jews, and that's anti-Semitism. What is really pernicious about the IHRA is its examples, the examples that they offer as part of the definition. And so one of the examples that they offer, that this is what the IHRA says is anti-Semitism, is the following. I'm going to quote for a second. Denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, e.g., by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor. So as Hilary talks about her family experience of the Nakba and the way that the state of Israel came into being, people could say that Hilary is claiming something that violates the IHRA definition, because she is talking about the Nakba and the very specifically racialized way that the state of Israel came into being, through a very specific racialized form of ethnic cleansing. So, Hilary, thank you. Sorry, forgive me
Oh,
for
thank you. That was very good. I'm glad you shared that.
forgive me for pulling in the actual words of the definition, but I want us to ground ourselves in that. I mean, we could talk about the other examples too and how they apply, but I just want to say for our listeners, like, look at the definition, look at the examples, look at the resources, but listen to Hilary. So, because here we are, this is what it looks, this is the real impact of policy. So, and I'll just, we know very clearly that the IHRA definition doesn't make doesn't actually make Jews any safer, and there is real rising anti-Semitism. So, okay, Hilary, bringing us back to this moment. We've been in this moment, but I want to ask you specifically if you'll talk a bit about what you think this moment in time and in history means for Palestinians and for Palestine.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't just, I think, talk about this one moment without, of course, recalling what we've been experiencing the last 15 months. And, you know, feelings of rage, grief, horror, relentless, and ongoing. And then I think for people like myself who live in the US, just living in a country that's complicit in genocide, that's taken part in it, it's very difficult. It's We're living in a collective trauma by being here, but also collective as in we are also trying to experience, we're we're experiencing the pain from afar. And people, even in Ramallah, who they have been watching what's happening in Gaza. And of course, the West Bank now is under attack. But it's it's been horrific. And I know I'm just stating the obvious, I guess. It's a very frightening moment because we have seen how Palestinian lives are expendable. And we were seeing how the international order is, the mechanisms that are there that are supposed to protect and prevent these types of atrocities from happening are not working. They're not functioning. Right now, we're seeing an existential threat, the ICC, and so we could be saying, I mean, I think this moment is, we see that this is gonna possibly continue. We're seeing that in the West Bank, where today we're seeing tanks going into Tulkarem, destroying homes, burning of villages, and the continuing violence. So further ethnic cleansing, annexation of the West Bank. It looks like we could be on sort of a deeper, going into a deeper Nakba, continuing Nakba. Yet we're also seeing other things. So we are seeing maybe signs both here and in Israel, well, I guess in the US amongst American Jewish community, the trying to decouple Judaism from Zionism is a necessary thing, I think, for our liberation. And maybe talking about the yin and the yang. I want to see the sort of that there is a horizon. I guess the point that I'm getting to is, if you asked me 10 days ago, I would only be maybe giving you these scenes. And then last Monday, the scenes of Palestinians in Gaza returning from the south to the north, those who were from the north and allowed to return. I don't know if most likely you've seen it, but I don't know if everyone on this webinar is or this podcast has seen these images of Palestinians joyfully going to the north singing, crying, how people are embracing each other. And as we were witnessing all of this as Palestinians, the symbolism of return. So Palestinians are displaced from one place to another, displaced again, displaced, and always wanting to return. And so symbolically, this group of people were returning, but they're returning to rubble, they're returning to destroyed homes, but returning joyfully. And there was something about the human spirit that was amazing. So you can't think of the people in Gaza just as victims. They're survivors. And I was reminded by my friend Rana Barakat, who's a professor at Birzeit University, who does a lot of work on the Nakba, and she talks about the story of the Nakba not only through the lens of despair, but also seeing it as sustained resistance. And so we also talk about sumud. And sumud, or steadfastness, was very present as we saw people of Gaza returning to the north, despite everything. I mean, there was just something extraordinary about that. And sometimes it's these moments in history that they may be just little glimpses. They may be things that keep us going, but they're important because things can change, and it could just all of a sudden change. We have to keep working towards that moment, but I have to believe that it will happen.
I so appreciate what you're saying, Hilary, both in terms of orienting us now to think about what's happening in Gaza and how we are thinking about the people in Gaza, and how we're watching what they're doing and thinking about those incredible scenes of what looked like miles and miles of people walking north. It was extraordinary, and walking north, and we know, like, where there are almost no buildings standing and or infrastructure for life, and yet they are returning to their homes and or to where their homes stood, looking for what remains, looking for the people they lost. And you are framing it for us and educating us around what this means as a Palestinian to watch it and to think about both return and the importance of return, and also sumud, this kind of steadfastness and resilience. So I feel like you just you oriented us, you gave us the values compass, that the experience, and also, like, what are the directions on your compass, and sumud and return are so key and core there. You just gave that to us, so thank you. And also, of course, the description of the horrors, experiencing and witnessing the horrors of the last 15 months. So I want to ask you, you're joining us for a year. Thank you. So you're going to be speaking to FMEP's audience. You'll be a fellow with us for 2025. So what do you most want FMEP's audience, our listeners, to know or to think about or to be challenged by as you join us in conceptualizing and hosting and participating in programs and conversations?
Wow, I just feel like, every day so much is happening that my head is spinning. I mean, I haven't even brought up Trump yet, and so I feel like this year a lot. We can discuss many different things. I think a lot will be happening both in the US and in Palestine. My hope is that I can help bring some voices from Palestine, but maybe also bring some voices from the academy or some you know, introduce some new books that are coming out that I'm very excited about. But in terms of, I guess, some of the values, and some of my practices, at least, that I find helpful in this time is, in the midst of all the horror and the suffering, it's it's a bit too much at times, you know, and it we feel like sometimes we can't sit with it, or we just want to turn away and turn off. And I understand that. I guess I struggle with um being in a society that doesn't want to look at all, but also understand that it's difficult to sit with so much horror. I feel for myself is that we shouldn't turn away from suffering, that we need to sit with it, and that it's the least we can do to honor the lives that are lost, to grieve them. And so I think, you know, centering human life would be one thing. I hope I do that with whatever I will be engaged with FMEP. I think to question which voices we're centering. Think of the voices that we're centering. Um, I think of what we try and do in the classroom with our students. We talk about disrupting injustice. We talk about disrupting injustice without replicating it. And we have so many examples of people who do that. And they are the ones that we follow and we learn from. And so those are some of the things that maybe will guide some of our conversations and some of the people that I will try and introduce to FMEP. Yeah, and I think this is after seeing so many people out protesting for Palestinian rights this last year, and then also seeing how just these protests are not enough, that grassroots power somehow needs to be interpreted into, and to be more strategic, to make a difference. And there's so much to be outraged about. I think it's possible that as things get even crazier in the US, that more people will wake up. And I hope that we can garner this moment to translate some of that into some real change, to real change for people's lives, to save people's lives. So yeah, I mean, these are very broad things, but I'm excited to be part of FMEP. And I think if there are members here that are interested in some of what I've shared, or have some questions or suggestions, directions that they would like me to help with, I'm very happy to entertain those.
Oh, what an
It's an honor.
invitation. Thank you, Hilary. We are so happy to have you, and so happy to have you to think about having this year together, as we will sit with the suffering and witness it and think about how we navigate it, and do everything that we can to to witness and honor and also reduce it. I love what you said about centering human life and interrupting injustice without replicating it. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I really do feel like you've laid out a values compass for us, with many important, really meaty and serious points on it. So thank you for that. And thank you for being here.
Thanks so much, Sarah Ann. Thank you.
And I want to thank all of our listeners for tuning into this episode of Occupied Thoughts. Check out our website, www.fmep.org, for resources related to this podcast. We'll have links to lots of the things that Hilary talked about and mentioned, and as I mentioned, also the IHRA resources. Check out our website for lots of other rich content related to Israel and Palestine. And please make sure that you're subscribed to our podcast so you stay up to date. You can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Spotify. And you can also watch video versions of our podcasts, including this one, on YouTube. Thank you so much. Take good care. See you next time.